Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to join me in order to revisit some of the events and some of the unique personalities that drove the creation of the modern day Florida that we know. While many people contributed to the early development of the state, and particularly the southeastern portions of the state, including and focusing on Palm Beach County, two people stand out as primary influencers of that development, both with a measurable impact on the culture, development, and future of Palm Beach County. Certainly without the late 1800s and early 1900s contributions of Henry Flagler, who almost single-handedly founded the tourist industry and personally funded the initial growth of Florida, the state and the area would have taken a far different, possibly much slower rate of growth, development, and enhancement. I'm going to briefly summarize his early life as the early life of Addison Mizner, touch on his early ventures, which included in Flagler's case, grain sales and salt mining during the Civil War, both of which collapsed after the war was over. At that point, it could be said that Flagler was an exemplary American entrepreneur with his business and financial risk-taking, including his successes and failure. He was very largely in debt at the end of the collapse of his salt company. Fortunately, relatives helped him get restarted. He managed to pay off all that debt, and in the process, met and worked with a John D. Rockefeller from Cleveland, Ohio. Rockefeller then spearheaded the opening of Standard Oil. Flagler helped finance the creation of Standard Oil through loans from his family, with the tenant that he owned 25% of the stock. So as of January 1870, Standard Oil was created. The company grew to control 90% of the U.S. oil refining and distribution markets, mostly as a result of Flagler's planning and skill at executing those plans. As a result of his first wife's illness in 1878, Flagler was advised to take her and spend winters in Florida to help her recover. Unfortunately, she did not and passed away in 1881. Flagler managed to remarry in 1883, and while traveling with his new wife to St. Augustine, his second or third trip to Florida, Flagler decided to build and open what turned out to be an instant success, the Ponce de Leon Hotel in 1885. It was then the world's largest resort and also the world's largest all-wood building. Upon opening the hotel, Flagler also realized that there was no way for anybody to actually get there, as the Florida East Coast Railroad had not yet become viable. There was a small narrow gauge railroad, however, from Jacksonville to the outskirts of St. Augustine, which he bought, converted it to standard gauge, and completed the link to St. Augustine to keep his hotel full. That was the start of what was to become an extensive rail network. The hotel flourished from the day it opened. At that point, he gave up day-to-day dealings at Standard Oil, however, remaining on the board. Due to frosts in St. Augustine and after his first wife's death, Flagler decided to move further south. So in 1894, he opened the Hotel Royal Poinciana in Palm Beach. That helped him escape winter freezes in the more northerly Florida climes. To further assure the availability of guests at Palm Beach, He paid and had the railroad extended from St. Augustine to Palm Beach, which was quite a distance. Upon the opening of the Royal Poinciana, it retook the crown of the world's largest resort and also largest wooden building from the Ponce de Leon in St. Augustine. He then expanded his hotel enterprises in Palm Beach by opening the Breakers Hotel a year later, which is not wood, but concrete and stucco. And that hotel is still in business today, has been modernized several times, and is one of the world's premier resorts. Well, in the mid-1890s, Palm Beach also experienced two severe winters in a row, with freezing temperatures affecting tourism and agriculture both. And of course, when it affected agriculture, it also affected the income of the railroad. So Flagler decided to move further south. In the process, extending the railroad to the then 400-person settlement known as Miami. He not only financed the railroad, built several new hotels, including the Royal Palm, which is also in business today, financed the total city infrastructure, including the water system and sewage treatment systems, opened the first newspaper, and then went on to reject the idea that the city be renamed Flagler City in his honor. It was 1897 that he opened the really exclusive Hotel Royal Palm, and along with the Breakers, those two hotels flourish today. Now, Flagler wasn't done. In 1902, after his second wife passed away, as a wedding gift to his third wife, after divorcing his second wife, Flagler built and opened what at the time was one of the world's largest private homes. That house was known as Whitehall. It was located in Palm Beach, and it's the home of the Flagler Museum today, and is still owned by the family of his third wife, who happened to be from South Carolina. Now, most people in their mid-70s at that point in time would have been very content to sit in a rocking chair and spend the rest of their lives just sitting and exploring. Most people at the age of 75 at that time would have been content to spend the rest of their lives in a rocking chair, but not Henry Flagler. In the early 1900s, he undertook the project of building what became known as the Overseas Railroad, extending the railroad from Miami to Key West. Now, at the time, Key West was a major port because the Panama Canal had just opened. So, with construction completed over several years, with many lives lost in the process, in 1912, Henry Flagler, at the age of 82 and mostly blind, rode the first train into Key West to a throng of people estimated to be about 10,000 or somewhat more. So along the way from St. Augustine to Key West, Flagler played a major role developing many of the East Coast cities. Beginning with St. Augustine, he developed Ormond Beach along the way, Daytona Beach, Palm Beach, Miami, and ultimately Key West. Quite an achievement for a single individual. Tragically, at the age of 83 in 1913, Flagler, mostly blind, fell down a flight of stairs while at Whitehall and never recovered. However, Henry Flagler's memory and legacy dot Florida's East Coast. And if anybody were to travel up and down the East Coast from basically Jacksonville to Key West, they would see Flagler's name on counties, cities, towns, roads, banks, buildings, restaurants, neighborhoods. Virtually every type of construction known has a Flagler as part of the name. Florida's East Coast Railroad is still in business today, and he left his mark on the entire length of the state, and particularly in Palm Beach County because of his home there and his funding of a lot of other structures. Well, that would have been a nice story to tell of East Coast Florida. But in 1918, another really unique individual arrived in, at that point in time, the city of Palm Beach. He also traveled to Florida, like Flagler, for his own personal health. He was advised by his physician to spend winters in Florida. And he would make another lasting imprint, not just on the city, but the entire county of Palm Beach. Because he took a small little virtually empty town and turned it into a booming city we all know as Boca Raton. That individual was Addison Mizner. Mizner, who by his own account was a self-taught architect, but he studied and interned with several renowned architects of the day, including a 3-year apprenticeship at the office of Willis Polk, a prominent San Francisco architect, before going to Palm Beach in 1918. Mizner created an entire new style of architecture that in some areas is still in use today. It was known as Mediterranean or modern Mediterranean or Florida's Mediterranean. Mizner also had a friendship with an heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune, namely a gentleman known as Paris Singer. Singer commissioned Mizner to design a house for him in Palm Beach. Singer financed, and ultimately, when Singer ran into some hard times later on, became the home of the still in existence Everglades Club. That home is shown in one of the figures, and it was the springboard for a series of design commissions for Mizner in Palm Beach. Many socialites, almost all wealthy and some famous, including Vanderbilts and others, paid for designs by Addison Mizner. So Mizner solidified the fact that Palm Beach became the winter playground for much of the rich and famous society scions of both the Midwest, New York, and New England. Mizner went on to design and develop numerous properties for both individuals, mostly wealthy individuals, and for public purposes, such as the Boca Raton City Hall, which, like many of his buildings, is still in use today. He also produced plans for the entire city, including a grandiose plan for a wide boulevard, which would be known as El Camino Real, splitting down the middle of the city with a 100-foot wide water canal down its center. Unfortunately, in 1926, most of those plans were doomed to failure because the land boom that existed in Florida at that time ended. It ended for a very interesting series of reasons that combined produced havoc. There were 2 years in a row with severe hurricanes, which put a damper on land sales and home building. Then, mixed in with the hurricanes were 2 extremely severe frosts, which also slowed down tourism and destroyed much agriculture in the central and northern parts of the state. The land boom did not return to Florida until somewhat after World War II. Shown in population data, it's really after 1960 that Florida experienced its major growth, which also continues to this day. One interesting fact, however, is that the growth of Palm Beach County, which in the early 1900s accounted to 1 or 2% of the total state population, is now at approximately 7%. It's quite an increase, while the state population increased from 300,000 to over 22 million. Palm Beach County went from 2% of that population to almost 7%. Quite a jump. Well, as you can see from the names, you can see from what has happened in the way of buildings, what has happened in the way of honors. Both Henry Flagler and Addison Mizner left their contributions to the state of Florida, and specifically Palm Beach County. Through their work, their investments, their influence, and their uniqueness. Both were unique characters. Both are also extremely viable examples of the American entrepreneurial spirit that existed in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They are examples of its drive and success. Flagler and Mizner, to an extent, represent the height and impact of America's, what become known as America's Gilded Age. That was an age of vision, risk-taking, and accomplishment. I still think that vision exists for this country and can be seen in the works and accomplishments of its aerospace industry, its construction industry, its farming industry, tourism, and the growth of individualism in the United States. I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this video and slide presentation.